Hello there, and welcome to South Asia Chat, a podcast brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. I'm your host, Dr. Imran Ahmed, a research fellow at the Institute. In this episode, we navigate the intricate terrain of Bangladesh's political scene, examining historical milestones, electoral intricacies, and geopolitical dynamics influencing its future. Join us as we unravel the complexities that define the political landscape of this vibrant South Asian nation. Our guest today is Professor Sreeradha Datta from the Jindal School of International Affairs. She holds a PhD and is the author of 7 books, including Bangladesh, a Fragile Democracy. Professor, welcome to South Asia Chat.
Thank you, Imran. What a pleasure to be here always.
Wonderful. My first question is, if you could provide an overview of the current political situation in Bangladesh, particularly focusing on the upcoming general elections in January 2024 and the reported crackdown on the opposition.
Yes, as we've just known, the Election Commission a few weeks ago had announced that the 12th Jatiya Samsad, which is the parliamentary elections, are going to be held on January 7th. So by the sound of it, it seems okay, but the problem is that this particular government, Awami League, who was ushered in with a very robust support in 2008 December elections, has stayed on with another election, which was 2014, which was one-sided, then 2019, which was even further one-sided. So clearly there seems to be an issue about that. And the way we see it just now, and of course, 30th November was the last date for, submission of nomination papers. And as of now, clearly BNP, which is the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, which is clearly the other larger party that Bangladesh has decided to stay out of it. Just as we see it at this point of time, there are about 26 parties of the 44 registered party that Bangladesh has who have now decided to take part in this particular election. But if you look at the composition of the 26 parties, it's only about a handful of them, maybe 5, who've actually ever had won anything and been participated, which is in the last election that I mentioned, which was the most acceptable election, which was held in 2008 in December. So now we see that Awami League Party, of course, is one of the larger party of Bangladesh, very ably led by the present Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. And the other large party, which is Bangladesh Nationalist Party, has decided to stay away. And not only are they staying away, there are about another number of, I think, 14 parties who have decided to stay away. The critical bit here is Jatiya Party, which I would say is the third largest party, but of course not with the kind of support that Awami League has, nor BNP. They have decided to join the election as not part of the coalition which they were earlier, but stand alone. But again, within Jatiya Party, there seems to be a confusion because one section of Jatiya Party, which is led by the former leader's wife, General Ershad's wife, Roshan, who stays, she will stay away. The other faction is led by his brother, who says that they will compete individually in these 300 constituencies. That's the way it is. But ever since, in fact, for the last 6 months, we've seen how Bangladesh National Party has demanded that they will not be joining the elections under this particular party. They insisted that Awami League needs to step down and also bring in a caretaker government. A caretaker government is a kind of a unique experience that Bangladesh has had ever since 1996. Bangladesh, I mean, just to say a little bit before that, has always been very, very divisive amongst its own, the political space. And there was very little trust for anyone. So if you're in government at this point of time, the other political parties outside the government don't have trust in you, which is what has led to this particular neutral government, which is basically led by technocrats. It was constitutionally brought in 1996, ironically on the demand of Awami League, who said they were not happy fighting elections when it was BNP, which is, being the host at that point of time. But once Awami League came in, and as I mentioned, the 2008 elections, in about 2011, through a constitutional amendment, they did away with the caretaker government, which was also, if you look at it, they had some legal ramifications. The judgment actually had suggested, I mean, there was a jury of about seven, of where four had said yes, the caretaker government can be done away with, while two had dissented, one had also had a different opinion. But the judgment has said that yes, while we think this government, neutral government, which is essentially a government that assists in the EC in holding free and fair elections, can still be continued for the next two electoral terms, because to bring in a positive political environment. But that, of course, and they had also, somebody had suggested that the parliament can also, this can be put in the parliament. But the Awami League government had heard nothing of it, and they said that no, it's constitutionally amended and it's been not part of the constitution anymore. So the problem now is that BNP insists that there should be a neutral government or caretaker government, and Awami League should step down, otherwise they will not fight the election. So at this point of time, and as we've seen suddenly, while though there was a kind of I would say, expectation of Awami League, because BNP has been in the wilderness for 15 years, they've been away from the political landscape, that they would not be able to usher in any, public support. But the kind of road rallies and the kind of blockades they've organized, they've got a huge number of people coming out supporting the BNP position clearly. So, and of course, we've seen in the last 1 month, the government has arrested over 100, if not many more, BNP leaders on basis of charges which were filed many years ago, between 2013 and 2014 and 18. Suddenly, in the last 1 year, 1 month, they got active. So basically, again, there's a kind of a leadership gap, and many of you are aware that Khalida Zia, the leader of BNP, is very unwell, and her son is also away from Bangladesh. He lives in London. He's unable to return to the government, to the country, because of several, corruption charges have been filed against him. So while there is a kind of a leadership vacuum just now within BNP, but given the fact that as we speak, there's constantly some activity which are being done by this pretty large party, and we had thought that maybe the EC would kind of, kind of increase change the nomination, the election date to a slightly, because I think they have to hold elections by the end of January, 24th January, if I'm not wrong. They would change, then, allow a little more space for the opposition party to come in and see if there's a space for negotiation. But clearly the mood on both sides is that there is no space for negotiation. So just as we see right now, and also in the meantime, what has happened is there were about 3 or 4 new parties which were floated in to obviously make this election look credible. That it doesn't matter if BNP is not fighting the election; these new, parties would fight the election, and they would, of course, be given the space for the opposition in the parliament. So it clearly looks pretty one-sided as of now. Yes, Imran.
Thank you for that really comprehensive overview of Bangladesh's political space. I found your comments on trust in Bangladeshi politics very interesting, and I found the overview that you provided about the caretaker government very interesting as well. You've touched on a lot of things that are in my next question already, which was about the perspective of the opposition. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of how has the government responded to the concerns that the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the BNP, have put forward about the elections?
The government clearly has ignored every single demand that BNP or the opposition parties have put forward. And in between, there was an attempt for the two leaders to have a telephonic conversation, which, I mean, came to nothing really. And while, as you know, there has been several attempts by international observers and others to ensure that there was some kind of a dialogue which would have opened, and they would have been able to, come together on the platform, at least negotiate from the two extreme positions that the parties are this at this point of time. But we've seen a terrible, I mean, what you mentioned earlier, that there's a very severe crackdown on, these demonstrations and all that that's happened. A huge amount of road violence, street violence has happened, intensified. We've also, as I had mentioned, there were several arrests of well-known leaders in the last few weeks, run up to the elections. And also there has been a bit of, a sudden situation where we've seen one or two particular BNP leaders who were arrested, then released. Now they've joined the Awami League. So all that political tweaking is also taking place. But just now, as we speak on today, we know that BNP is still staging these mass demonstrations and street protest, hoping that there would be a change of situation, but they certainly do not want to join the elections under the Awami League government. And as I mentioned, because of the Awami League government's position, that not only will they not resign, for sure, that's never been under consideration, but bringing in a caretaker government which would have ensured a different environment in the electoral space is certainly not being considered. So, these are the two major demands. Of course, there's several other demands right now, but these are the two main issues on which BNP refuses to join the elections. And, Bangladesh has as I said, in 2014 and 20 elections, they were largely one-sided. 2014 BNP on the same reasons did not join the elections. On 2018, they had said that they would join the elections, irrespective of what it was, how restrictive the political landscape was. But it was pretty bizarre, because even before the electoral day, actually the evening before, all the votes were cast, the ballots were filled. So, and declaration of electoral win happened on 2018 elections, with several amount of hundreds and thousands of voters who were not able to cast their vote. So clearly very one-sided, and we are seeing a very similar situation happening just now, right now. But again, as I mentioned, this, like the last two elections, it was somehow accepted, and we didn't see so much of people uproar or mass movement by the political parties, opposition parties. This time we see a lot of that on the road, and of course a lot of violence. The government has come down very sharply. There's of course both sides of the opinion. Is BNP says that they were being peaceful, but security forces came down very sharply on them. And I just want to add to this particular very, very uncertain, unpredictable electoral political space that's happening in Bangladesh. Simultaneous with all this, that there has been another problem which is still ongoing, is a problem with the ready-made garment industry, which is their largest export earner and contributes to Bangladesh's GDP very robustly. But there has been attempts by the ready-made garment workers to ensure that they have better, minimum wages, and better working conditions. And again, while there has been a kind of a commission set up, and the recommendation was also not accepted by the a government-led commission, actually, their recommendations were not accepted by the owners of the ready-made garment sector. So there again, the security forces have come down very sharply on them, and it's been a very chaotic political situation, and this has also added to the kind of problem that Bangladesh people are facing at this point of time.
Thank you so much for that. My next question is concerns a question about international observers and transparency. Now, the approval of international election observers by the government is seen as a move towards transparency. However, the recent controversy surrounding the qualifications of some approved observers has raised questions. How do these developments impact the credibility of the electoral process, both domestically and internationally?
Yes, I think very recently the Foreign Secretary had actually met about, representatives from about 90 missions in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, and he, had explained the situation, was hoping for a support. But as you know that, US was the first country which had kind of had tried to impress on Bangladesh government that they needed to create a more conducive environment for elections. And when they realized that the talks or dialogues wasn't going the way they had expected it to, they also had imposed or enacted, I would say, a new visa policy, which was for promoting democratic elections in Bangladesh. And I think early September this year, that policy has been implemented. Basically, they are saying that anybody who's engaged with undermining the democratic electoral process is somebody who's going to be targeted by being denied visas. So, but at the same time, in a couple of months ago, there was a bipartisan group from the US who had come down to, examine the political environment. Also, we've seen I think two sets of other, pre-election missions coming from the European Union also to examine again the political conditions. But we've seen that there are several attempts by, I think there were 6 MPs from European Union who had also joined United States and expressed their concern about the kind of violence that was ongoing and the kind of conditions which were not conducive for a free and fair election. We've seen Japan and South Korea again, who are very major, strong partners, economic partners for Bangladesh, who also expressed their concern about that. And while Bangladesh government, the point that you made, that they have kind of said that no, we have enough international observers to, kind of ensure that to see the conditions are in place and incorrect and how it should be really. But again, we do understand that it's not really how it would be. And of course, we would like to hear mention uh, the fact that India, China, and Russia has lent support to the present government also is kind of, weighing in for them. And there seems to be, I think, kind of a condition where we don't think right now the ground conditions are very legitimate conditions for holding free and fair conditions. I mean, free and fair elections. So that's something that, so no matter how much the Bangladesh government wants to prove through some not so credible observers, it does look a bit awkward at this point of time.
Thank you so much for that very detailed survey. My next question is about the economic repercussions of the political uncertainty that we're seeing at the moment. Could you elaborate a little bit about how this affects the country's economic progress? You touched on the unrest that's happening in the country. What are the key challenges that the country may face in the economic domain during this political deadlock?
The country is already facing a huge economic, crisis. In fact, it's a very contrast to the situation, the economic status that Bangladesh enjoyed. In fact, one of my earlier books that I'd done under ISAS was at Bangladesh at 50, where we had examined the growth story of Bangladesh in great details. And we had seen how, the country had, from the very well-known basket case tag, to had very sustained high economic growth despite political instability, low inflation, extremely good foreign exchange reserve. But that seems to be a story of the past. Right now, the way we see it, there's a huge economic, of course, the economic pressure has doubled in recent times, also because of this particular, the pandemic and the effect of pandemic, the Ukraine war. But at the same time, we have seen what I think most of us think, that despite these external challenges, which has certainly contributed to the economic strain which Bangladesh is facing at this point of time, and Bangladesh, as we know, has always had to deal with very difficult weather patterns, extreme heat waves, heavy rains, unexpected floods. That, of course, has always been something that Bangladesh have had to grapple with. But what we see, the extreme difficult conditions that has been now created, was also because of how Bangladesh's unethical business practices, which has, kind of ensured that the kind of inflation that Bangladesh sees today is probably the highest of its kind. There's been hoarding, there's been price fixing, issues like artificial shortages have been created, extremely poor, corporate governance. All of that has kind of contributed to that already you know, dep kind of depleting reserves that Bangladesh has. In fact, Bangladesh right now, at this point of time, is maybe my figures a bit not so latest, but they had a negative current deficit of more than 3 billion. And in fact, the overall balance of payment was again this last quarter was about in the negative of over more than 8 billion. In the meantime, IMF had given a small bailout, which they didn't call a bailout. They said it was a kind of a support. But what we see here is that Bangladesh, despite its amazing growth story, it has never had the infrastructure that it needed. It was never able to, because of which, these external shocks were something they couldn't ever deal with, and they were not able to handle it. And apart from the other issues that I mentioned, that because of the external conditions, the ready-made garment industry, which we had referred to earlier, was hit badly. Bangladesh's growth story is also due to the workers, which send in huge amount of remittance, which of course, because of pandemic and the particular ongoing war, has also come down very sharply. But at the same time, the internal issues which I just mentioned flagged a few. There's been many in the public domain stories about how some particular corporate groups have been able to hold the banks at near ransom. I mean, we've always seen that banks in Bangladesh, there has been a term that often is used for Bangladesh, which is known as bank gaming, which is known to be an old disease. But the situation here is really gone worse. I mean, what we now see is that state-owned banks, which have been controlled by the finance ministry, have been buried under pile of debts. And historically, we've seen how central banks had always monitored the private sector banks, which is relatively better performance. But that's not the story anymore. And we've seen how Bangladesh, they've deliberately kept the exchange rate low, while the IMF had also at the meantime had demanded that subsidies should be taken away, which should have affected overall, but it didn't. It affected only the poorer section of the people. And what we've seen here is that a group of the how would say the elitist who's been able to actually able to manipulate the system very well to suit their purpose. And what we see, and of course, I mean, which points to the kind of corruption which is the bane of the ongoing problem here. And right now also another issue which is attributed or contributed to this problem here is the issue of energy. There's been a severe energy crisis again ongoing in Bangladesh. And while Bangladesh at some point of time had enough sources of natural gas, which is now again there's been a decline in that supply. LNG has now come in to kind of offset that. India, of course, comes in very strongly here, has been supporting with a lot of energy trade that's happening between the two countries. But Bangladesh also recently opened its first nuclear power plant. Of course, it's not going to operate right away. So they are trying other ways to offset what has happened. But energy crisis is going to affect Bangladesh's already economic dire condition, and which will affect the ready-made garment industry also very sharply. Not only because of the workers. Movement that we see just now, the protests, but also because energy is a core component for running this industry very well. Yeah, so I think right now, I think I would sum it up by saying that the economic challenges facing Bangladesh are really a factor of the inadequate and incorrect policies that we've always seen here. There is inherent structural weakness. There's a severe lack of good governance. There's absolutely no initiative for any reforms to be brought in. So all of this has, made conditions really, really severe. And the way I see it just now in my daily conversation with friends in Bangladesh, food inflation has, touched the sky. We've never seen Bangladesh in a situation like this, so really dire conditions, if I may say so.
Thank you so much for taking us through all the different ways in which the governance issues are interconnected. My last question is about geopolitical influences and your thoughts on the future. You touched on a little bit about the growing pressure from the United States for democratic reforms. I was curious to know what you thought about the involvement of regional powers and how that adds a geopolitical dimension to the current political situation. How do these external influences shape the current political landscape in Bangladesh? And what potential scenarios could unfold based on these dynamics?
Of course, as we mentioned, the US sanctions is bound to have some effect, which is also another reason why we've seen a huge amount of flight of money that's happened because, given the situation that there are several people who will fall under that particular category. But also we've seen, like I mentioned earlier, while US and some of the European countries are constantly talking about how Bangladesh government is not respecting democratic norms. It's pretty fragile democracy, and but at the same time, regional partners like India, for instance, which is a very close enjoys a very close partnership with Bangladesh, is rooting for stability. And we believe that under Sheikh Hasina, Bangladesh has greater opportunity for growth, for stability, for secularism, which we think is not the case. And as you know, Bangladesh government, whether it's Awami League or any other government, has always worked very well with China. And China also in the past, we've seen that whenever there has been some noises made about the previous elections, China has also come to support Bangladesh quite openly about the fact that they accept the electoral verdict. So right now we see that China, and of course, given the condition situation, Russia is also pulling its weight with India and China. So at one level, I would say, while the regional countries or the extra regional countries are rooting for stability, um and ensuring that this particular government is able to, carry on with the kind of good work that it had done. There are some countries who are, uh, you know, have come down sharply on some of the pretty non-democratic processes that's been initiated by this government. The way I see it, even if elections were to be held, and I'm going back to earlier situations of Bangladesh, whether it was in 91, when Ershad literally was, had to step down because people and all the political parties came together on the road. Literally, they were out on the road, all of them. The civil society, and ensure that the Jatiya Party chief, the military leader Ershad, steps down. Similarly, in 96, we've seen when BNP had finished his term after electoral democracy was restored in 91. They had wanted to rig the elections, and which is where I had mentioned earlier that Awami League had then insisted that this particular election, which was held under BNP, was one-sided. It's not acceptable. So there was a re-election in within a matter of few months again under a caretaker government, which was again done because people protested. People did not take that. But right now, and as I mentioned, 2014 and 2018 elections are pretty one-sided, but we did not see any political activism or, any. There was always simmering anger because if you had any conversation with anybody in Bangladesh, they would tell you that this is not acceptable, and this has happened because some of the major powers in the region has supported in Bangladesh. But right now, I feel that I think the patience of Bangladeshis are, kind of pushed to its limit. And I'm not terribly convinced that election like this, which looks to me right now very, very one-sided, is going to be acceptable by the electorate. Uh, we sincerely hope that there'll be some kind of a change in position to ensure that the elections are truly free and fair, where every single political party, legitimate political party, should enter the electoral fray. And uh, what has happened in this whole electoral difficult conditions is there has been greater inroads of particularly Islamic groups. Historically, Islamic political parties in Bangladesh have always been there. They've existed, but electorally they've been very, very low. They've never received any political support. But now, though Jamaat Islami Party is legally banned because there's a high court case going on, but given the difficult conditions that are unraveling on a day-to-day basis, I don't think that the political cadres of these political parties, the Islamic groups, are going to stay behind. They will join the elections through some other forum, some other platform. And while we are, there's some countries that I mentioned, India, is rooting for stability. I am not terribly convinced that a 2024 election, which is going to be one-sided, is going to enable a very stable political space. That's my fear, and but who's to know what is to happen really? And as I said, I always have faith in the Bangladesh civil society because they really understand. They see through the games political leaders do, and this is across the board. It doesn't matter which political party, because every political leader in Bangladesh or elsewhere have always tried to manipulate the system towards their own benefit. But Bangladeshis have always, risen to the occasion, have ensured that again it's a living playing field is being ensured for everyone. So I'm really hoping that something like that again happens right now.
Thank you so much. When I was drafting these questions, I actually wanted to ask a question about the Jamaat, but I left it out. So I'm very glad that you touched on that. So I think that's all that we have time for today. Thank you so much, Professor, for sharing your insights on South Asia Chat.
Thank you, Islam. It's always a pleasure to be on this platform. Thank you.
You're listening to South Asia Chat. To learn more about our work, please visit us at isas.nus.edu.sg. You can also get updates through social media. We are on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. South Asia Chat is also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you.